Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you are all doing well on this fine Sunday. It's really nice to be streaming again. It's been a busy week. I mean, I know we just had the Digital Archipelago, but it's nice to sort of do this again, which is to catch up with all of you on what I've been up to. And most specifically, it's been a week now since we had the conference last weekend in Tennessee with the last Scyldings event. So I thought it would be fun to review it. I know everyone's sort of given their takes now, and I know that Dave, the Distributist, will be giving his take later, and he's got like a slideshow and everything. So that one will be it'll be well worth your time to review this, go to this one, and then to Dave's after this. So I thought that I have some time. It's been a very busy week for me to catch up after this little trip, and why not sort of break down what the event was like, what it was all about. I can see some of the people in chat who were there last weekend, whether it was Lou Templar, Mike of Pole, or Cody Bassett. Really good time to see all of you. But we're going to talk about what the event was and what it was all about, how it was nice to see old friends again. I think one of the benefits of how it was from last year was that sort of everyone kind of got the awkward meeting people in real life jitters out of the way. And I mean, from now and last February of last year, it's been just a totally different world between basket weaving, setting up organizations, wanting to do more in the real world, and not just political stuff, but I think most importantly in this sort of deracinated, discarnate kind of world that we live in, making sure that you're in touch with, I guess, what you would call baseline reality is really important. So last year, if you weren't aware, the Scyldings guys and the Beowulf Foundation had put on the first U.S. event here in the United States outside of Nashville last year. And the strategies or the talks last year were oriented around the theme of strategies for navigating the ruins. We all sort of live in modernity. We all sort of know what the problems are. This sort of progressivism is hammering down on us. So what are the strategies, both practical, theological, social, spiritual, that work? And a lot of those discussions were really fruitful, and it led to the creation of more basket weaving organizations. It led to the creation of the Old Glory Club, which we'll get into today. So this year, it was about forging a common foundation, and I'm just going to read a little bit out of it. Building upon the insights gained from last year's event, this year we strive to cultivate a shared understanding and vision for our future. Join us as we embark on this journey of exploration to seek and forge a common foundation that can bring us towards a brighter future. And so the first speech, I'm just going to go through the order of speeches. I'm not going to give like a full bring down of each speech. I want you to buy the event book, which is not only in the description for the link, but it will be the pinned comment after we're done streaming today. But the speakers that were there there were cavalcade of returning guests and speakers, including myself, as well as some new people. So Stephen Carson, Radlib spoke, I spoke. We had two Canadians speak, ESO and Indy Wallace Swan, which had great talks. Oren McIntyre, Dave the Distributist, the Old Glory Club had a panel, followed by some returning guests like Not Me, Not You, Charlemagne, and new guys such as Grant Brooks, Mike of Pole, and George Bagby. And it was a really good time to meet George Bagby in person. If you've been familiar with Jay Burden's work, you know that he's one of the sort of greater American historians, as Christopher Sandbach likes to describe him. There are only 10 Southern conservatives ever alive on this earth at time, and he's one of them. But he was there selling his wares and things like that. I bought some really good books, including Empire is a Way of Life by William Appleman Williams. And I also got a paperback copy of The Hour of Decision by Mr. Oswald Spengler. So it was a fun time to meet so many people in real life and to say hello to whatnot. And yeah, I thought it was a really good time. So I had took notes for just about every single speech, and we're going to go through them in a little bit. But I wanted to first sort of get out of the way the importance of these sort of conferences. Now, sort of the common critique I hear things are about, do things IRL. We have to keep doing things IRL. It's the same sort of thing that the left likes to say, where we're going to have conferences and we're going to have talks and we're not going to do anything. The thing that I've noticed here, primarily from this year versus last year's event, is that actual organization has been done, and a lot of work has been put on the ground to facilitate networks and to organize and to do things. After the event last year, for instance, Paul Fahrenheit had the idea that basket weaving is really important and that it should be feasible for us to travel coast to coast, knowing which kind of friends that we can stay with or who our allies might be in various states as things get more progressively under the guise of anarcho-tyranny. And so that, led to more basket weaving. The Dave the Distributist has been really spearheading it where he's at, up in sort of the New England area. I think he's in New Jersey, but I'm not too sure. And then on top of that, you've also got the creation of the Old Glory Club, this sort of fraternal organization where we want people to know that they're not alone, but also to facilitate in the future projects like mutual aid, a focus on American history, and so on. So, I mean, already in the year and a half distance from February of 2022 to just last weekend, there's been a monumental amount of work done. And it was, again, it's always nice when you can run into events and everyone sort of speaks the same language. Like, I don't have to tell you to read, 500 different books or 5,000 pages worth of like right-wing literature for you to sort of understand where we're coming from. And it's really appreciative of the fact that like I can meet people and it doesn't matter if you're a content creator, an audience member, it doesn't matter. Like in this instance, I can just like shake your hand and I know exactly where you're coming from. And we're all kind of having these very similar struggles, having these political opinions and observations of how the world works and recognizing that things are not doing so well. And so, like I said, Mr. Bagby was selling some really good books. It was a pleasure to meet him in real life, as well as a majority of you whom I've never had the opportunity to meet before. So we're going to go through my notes for the speeches, and I'm going to move past my notes here, and we're just going to go through it real quick. I'm going to talk a little bit about each speech, but again, I'm not going to go into full detail, and we're going to sort of talk about the themes that we sort of came out from all of these speeches. There were really three big themes or big categories that I think were really in there. You had rhetoric and orators that were sort of focused on the high concept ideals, the ideas of what should we ground ourselves in, these sort of metaphysical, metapolitical concepts. Then you had more mechanical speeches, like, well, how do things work mechanically on the ground? What does setting up an organization look like? What does our current political formula look like? What does the political formula of the regime look like? And that's something that's really important to consider. And then, of course, the third I would consider to be like the warm fuzzy, like the high bombastic ideas that we all sort of want. It's like red meat for the base. And don't get me wrong, red meat's kind of good because we live in a world where most of our politics are not red meat. It's like impossible meat or fake meat. And it was good to hear, no, these are the things that we actually believe in. And these are the things that we must associate with in order for any sort of political situation to change for us on the right in America. And so like the first speech of the night was from Stephen Carson, Radlib. And I thought that he had set the tone very well for Friday night. The social hour was good. There were many people who bought last year's event books, which I've got mine here somewhere. There we go. So, Navigating the Ruins, which I think you can still purchase. I'm not 100% sure. But, people were running up with their event books and asking the speakers to sign it, which I thought was like a weird boundary of parasociality that I wasn't used to, but neither here nor there. If you can tell, I've got a giant pile of books already on my desk. But Radlib set the tone very well when he was discussing the concept of justice. He discussed the history of the word social justice, which has been around for about 150 years, and how the word social justice has evolved into, equity, diversity, and inclusion. You have the environmental social governments, your ESG bit, which is funny because as moment as we started talking about ESG at the event, we saw a headline that said Larry Fink of BlackRock says he doesn't want to use that term. It's a poison pill of a term, which fit very well because Radlib was talking about things like weasel words and how they play the Mott and Bailey game when it comes to definitions. And that's really how the left likes to operate because they can defend these high-minded concepts, but when it's on the ground, right, like when the praxis takes place, it gets really ugly. And we kind of already see this day in and day out, whether it's in France, whether it's the Summer of Floyd 2020 riots or the transgender industrial complex. So he was going through not just like the Christian idea of justice, but he was going through all of the ideas of antiquity, not just in the West, but also in like the Orient, and saying like these concepts of justice are very much to the point. They're very strict. They want people to recognize that, no, like if you do these things, there are consequences. And we have to ensure that whatever model of justice that we want to adapt going forward, it has to be built upon these common ideas about like murder is bad, adultery is bad, usury bad, these very core concepts that have been around not just in the Middle East, not just in Western Europe, but through all sort of ancient cultures of antiquity. And we need to pursue those going forward, because really our concepts of justice have only seen this major aberration in the last 150 years. And so I thought him sort of talking about a very important idea. We don't really talk about it. We talk about the justice system. We talk about how broken it is, but we don't really get to reaffirm what justice is about. And I think that that's a really important concept. So he spoke Friday evening. It was a very good talk. The social hour was good. I got to meet so many lovely people. It was about 50-50, maybe 60-40 of returning conference goers versus 40% who were new faces. I got to meet Patrick Casey in person. I got to meet a variety of people. It was very diverse in its age groups. It wasn't just young men in their 20s and 30s. It was a lot of Gen Xers, and there were even some boomers that were there, or someone who was borderline Gen X, borderline baby boomer. And he brought his wife. And after one of the talks, his wife approached me, and he's just like, how do we get these older people involved? Like, a lot of these angry sort of Gen X boomers yell at their television, post, Fed posty things on Facebook. They're not tuned in to how bad things really are and how to get organized and how to put their money into things. So it was rather interesting to see this sort of diversity of age and background and experience, whether it's like HVAC repair guys, plumbers, car and automotive individuals, from computer programmers, salesmen, legal. I was rather impressed. And I mean, everyone looked presentable. Everyone looked good. Working class and white collar were all there. It was rather impressive, to say the least. So yeah, Radlib sets it off, the tone, I think, rather important, because it's very on theme for what we're discussing. What is the common foundation? What can we build off mutually for justice? But it's one of those speeches that I think will look even better when you get to the event book itself. So it was quite impressive. I spoke first thing on Saturday morning. I don't really want to talk about my speech just yet. I'll probably leave that towards the end. In part because I think that there are far more important things to talk about than what I discussed. And I think others have already reviewed my talk as it is. So the first person who spoke after me was the gentleman named Iso. He works with the Beowulf Foundation, Basket Weaving, and Scyldings, which, he sort of discussed, what does it look like to build an organization? How does it look like for organizing overseas? He's a Canadian, so, I mean, the day of the rake will come. But he was talking about how we all got here, and he sort of argued for this interesting model about, like, he says, well, look at Carl Benjamin. Out of all of the skeptics, social justice warrior era of politics, of Gamergate, only really one of them sort of has stood the test of time. And because whether we like Carl's politics or not, Carl Benjamin, went from being Sargon of Akkad, being like a UKIP guy, to now he has the Lotus Eaters, and they just have a new studio, and they look like rather a successful broadcast news thing for doing a podcast that is well known for sort of ripping off this sphere's talking points. And to hear from the staff members there that Carl is maybe the more liberal out of all of them. So, you've got a good bunch. And that illustrates that building is very possible. And so he was talking about building trust, having business incubators, having a system where you're working with volunteers, franchising, having media influencers, and how we can sort of evade the Bertrand de Jouvenel high-low versus middle thing when it comes to government, and how important basket weaving is for getting people involved. I mean, it was a very, very technical, very mechanical speech for how we can organize and get ourselves together, and making sure that everyone knows what they need to do in order to provide incentives and to have management styles that will ensure any sort of organization that you have, whether it be in a European country or over here in the New World, is more likely to be successful. So it was a very good, straightforward, here's how we're going to break down organizational bits. So like if you're new, like if you've been to a business class, or things like a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, this was applied now in a right-wing organizational space that isn't like, oh, we're going to just like go have tiki torches or whatever. Because like everyone has kind of learned the lessons of the last 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And so it's really illustrative of the fact that, Gamergate was 10 years ago. And for a lot of people who've just gotten sort of politically influenced or red-pilled, for lack of a better word, there's a lot of lessons that you can learn from. And his speech did a very good job at breaking that down. The next talk, of course, was from our other Canadian. They went back to back, which was interesting. But they sort of talked about he had this idea, and he had a really interesting phrase. He said, democracy is an interregnum to monarchy. So, in between sort of monarchical leaders, we have these like phases of democracies or mass politics, and it's never been very successful. And I think our current iteration of politics, both here in America and in the West, is not very good. And so his speech sort of talked about the nature of exit, both as an exodus from our own current problems, as well as the issue of how do we build? Can we build elsewhere? And so, there's a lot of discussion about wealth, as well as how that wealth can be used potentially elsewhere. There was a very strong expatriate kind of theme to his talk. And I know that for some, exit is an opportunity. I know a lot of expats that have left the country. Some of my favorite content creators are expats. Endeavor and American Krogan are, they don't live in Canada or the United States. They got out. And then he sort of talked about the need to avoid things like cowardly optimism, sort of that, Oswald Spengler, optimism is cowardice sort of line that people take. And he sort of built off of the Ed Dutton concept of, building a sort of a Byzantine-like system. And it was funny because he kind of looks like Tom Green. I know I'm sort of aging myself a bit there, but all I could think about, and I wrote it in my notes, was like democracy got fingered. It was an interesting talk. I don't think I can buy up to sort of the expat idea, or even to live as an expat in my own country, because I have nowhere else to go. And if you have a family, or if you've just started settling down, then getting up and leaving is a little different. I think being an expat really matters if you have capital and you don't have any attachments. I kind of think about the movie Heat. Like, you can leave, you can only do this kind of life if you're willing to drop everything in 30 seconds and go. And sometimes people can't do that. But for some, I definitely see it. For instance, there was a gentleman there from, I think they're called the Praxis Society, where they really are about building cities and sort of these like Singapores out in like the Aegean or in the Mediterranean. So, I mean, there are people doing it. I don't know how well that would go. I can't help but think of that line from Sam Houston, all of you can go to hell. I will go to Texas. And I think I'll die here. And I think I'm okay with that till the bitter end. But, it was an interesting discussion. It made me think about like the startup state. It felt very neo-reactionary 1.0. Not that that's bad. There's some stuff that you can still glean from those thinkers, but I don't know if it was necessarily for me in that respect. But I mean, nevertheless, there's still a lot that can be taken away from, how can we acquire capital? Where is exit? And even if you aren't planning to leave the country, say you're planning to move across the United States or to a different town, those are things that you have to consider, like, what does the power structure look like? Where does law enforcement? Where are all sorts of deals with respects to fighting and dying versus being able to get up and go? And what does that necessarily entail for a lot of people? So it was a very interesting sort of comparison between a very dedicated, let's stay here and build, versus the other Canadians, this speech, particularly by Mr. Swan, who was saying, yep, let's just go. And let's talk about building things elsewhere. So yeah, it was very intense in regards to where it was. I mean, the jokes were always good, Instead of saying certain lovely 3-letter words, we have things like soy slumber. People are into a stupor in their own world, and they don't recognize how bad things are around them. He had a dry wit to him, to say the least, which I kind of have to respect. Very dry humor is very hard to pull off these days. But after that, we had a lovely lunch and a great break between the two speakers there, who are the Canadians. And from there, we had sort of I guess what you could argue the most mainstream guest out of all of us was Orrin McIntyre. He was unlike the other speakers who had, had a speech, or if you were like me who kind of spoke extemporaneously with just a note card, Orrin McIntyre was happy to play his former job of being a school teacher and discussing, why the woke or why this sort of leftist or progressivism that we see today is not going away. He kind of opened it up saying that Orrin and Academic Agent have a disagreement and a bet about whether or not the woke will be put away in the coming year from now or so. And Orrin was like, nope, the woke's not being put away, at least not in the United States. And here's why. And so it was the glory of having a PowerPoint presentation explain the mechanics of managerialism, political formula, why managers apply systems. It's a global homogeneity, and sort of like our best practices, techno-capital accelerationism is not probably going to happen because it has these great people literally by the balls. Again, whether it's the transgender industrial complex, the wokeness aspect of it, none of that's disappearing. And so, he had the words like gray goo, like we have this ultimate homogenizing managerialism that is ever expanding, especially out of the United States. And the USG is not putting it away because you've got true believers. You've got a system that needs to bring in more people, to bring in more managers. And I literally wrote down here, it's the gray goo scenario, but everyone turns gay. Like that's sort of where you're at here. Because, the culture war, immigration, all these like big civilizational issues, they all turn into like this perfect like triad of issues that you actually have to address. Because in a homogenizing managerial system that is wokeness, immigration is this never-ending flow of new people that you can just sort of bring in that tell you, yeah, like we're on board with this woke crap. This is why you can get, Muslims to, throw out their ideas and support homosexuality in the United States. Yes, the gay goo. That's a better title, actually. He sort of inspired me in that respect. To write like the gay paperclip down, as the gray goose scenario, but the gay goose is even funnier because that's just disgusting. But yeah, I mean, he sort of talked about the differences between like Mosca and Pareto on the issue of elite theory, and just brought everything together. Like he had, Sam Francis, he had Mosca, he had Pareto, he had Land, he had Yarvin, sort of like the culmination of like the last major 5 years of reinvigorating elite theory, sort of this condensed PowerPoint presentation that was arguing, actually, no, like this is only going to get worse. And again, sort of in typical black pill fashion, right? Like, yeah, this is not going away. And he did look like a history teacher. You're absolutely right, because that's what he taught was U.S. history. So, the big thing I think that to take away here is that like, McWorld, like when we talk about Jihad versus McWorld, that great Barber book, McWorld is homogenizing progressive managerialism. That is what Jihad versus McWorld is. And if you bring Jihad into the United States, McWorld wins. As someone had famously commented on my video about the spirit of the age, it's the rich and affluent Muslims that come to like the United States and Canada. The poor ones just cross the Mediterranean. And that, we can see that happening right now. Whereas, unless there's a high concentration of them in the United States, they kind of support this wokeness. If not in Dearborn, they'll just ban gay pride, which, I mean, cool, but you still shouldn't belong here anyway. That's just sort of the nature of things. But that's sort of one of the bigger speeches, I think, that was rather important because globalization enables a homogenizing managerialism, and that's where you go from there. And it's sort of a disaster. And that's the real big thesis of it, was this very mechanical, well put together discussion that no, the wokeness is not going away anytime soon. And so he gave us the best case against, AA's point that it will be put away. Because he makes a point, like, listen, if the regime were smart, yeah, I would put the woke away too. Like, it does not matter that a couple of companies didn't change their profile picture during Pride Month. That's still happening. It's still going to take place. And he gave us a good explanation as to why. If you want to know what that looks like, and if you want his full explanation, go buy the event book. I highly recommend that you do. Because it covered everything. Like, it was the mother of all black pills, but it was probably the best presentation of every thinker that is in the popular right-wing discourse, and as to why these causes and methods are not going away. So, he's just telling you, like, prepare prepare, because yeah, it's not going away. So yeah, those was probably, we had a lengthy break afterwards, and sort of the OGC got together, myself included, to discuss what we were going to have on the panel, but I'm going to save that towards the end. And it was a nice time to just sort of meet new people. I got to meet Last Things. If you're not familiar with his sort of media content work, you're definitely missing out, because he's just a fantastic media breakdown guy. He was on with Orange just the other week about Nick Land. He's been on with Geo as well. He's a really fantastic dude. It was a really pleasure to meet him. I didn't know he was coming. So like when he tapped my shoulder and was like, "Hey, I'm Last Things," I was just like, "Oh, cool. I love your work." I had my own parasocial moment, which is weird to admit out loud, but that is sort of the things that sort of come with it, is where you have to break that parasocial barrier and sort of meet people and discuss them and meet them where they're at. But then the last speech of the night was Dave the Distributist. And if it's not obvious between my like username and what I talk about here, then yeah, I take a lot of influence from him. And Dave gave, I think, what I would call a very metaphysical speech. I think he labels himself as a preacher in his own breakdown, but it was red meat, because it was a very powerful, strong Dave video essay type deal. It was very good. But rather than him talking about BreadTube or ContraPoints or any of what the left says, he didn't talk about any of that. It was like, like the progress bar, all this experience points gained. Dave did not talk about BreadTube, didn't talk about ContraPoints, didn't talk about Vouch. I think the only person that he really talked about was like Tom Friedman, from the New York Times. Like, it wasn't anything major that made me feel like, okay, like it wasn't like Dave's greatest hits. Like last year's speech, Dave's speech was on the Chobani commercial and leftists living in unreality. And it was very entertaining because, like, to me, those were the hallmarks of like Dave speeches. And which last year he answered the question, "Dave, why do you watch BreadTube?" Right? And this year he was like, "Well, actually, we're going to talk about the boomers." He addressed the boomer question, like the BQ. And I had wrote in my notes Dave of the Pillow, which I thought was very entertaining. I make myself laugh, but he sort of talks about, the boomer truth regime, and how he mentions the idea of, well, eventually when we start talking with people and they sort of recognize how bad things get, like the brain just snaps, and all of a sudden, like the chatbot resets, and he calls it the boomer moment. Like, boomers can be told how bad things really are, and but then their brain just resets and they tell you, actually, well, if you just go out and talk to the boss of the establishment and hand him your resume and say you want to get hired, that's the key to success. Or, if you just have a strong personality, that girl will obviously show you that you're interested in. Like all the boomerisms that we're sort of used to. And, Dave was doing metaphysical stand-up. That's absolutely right. It was metaphysical stand-up. And it was good. And so to sort of get here, is we live in an imminent catastrophe, but boomers think that we have this indestructible, overly benevolent government. And you can see this in the New York Times of these older progressive boomers, and even just the boomer mindset. We're not even talking about the generation of baby boomers. We're just talking about people who were there. And he says, we don't have to worry about the AI problem in this country because, Vice President Kamala Harris is on the job. Like, no one believes this. But the boomer moment tells us, well, we can trust the government to do things. And that's right, Steve. Spiritual boomers can be of any age. And I, for one, can't wait till I'm on my lawnmower at 6:30 a.m. When I'm in my 30s, annoying my neighbors. But that's a different sort of bit here. So really, the issue, of course, is that there are no authority. Like, we have no authority because people have no roots. We live in sort of this era of poison pill cynicism, and it's incredibly bad in that respect. But he had also, people want to slide back into normiedom. People want to slide back into what feels safe, and they don't want to address the fact that the basic answers to our current system are really terrifying answers. And then he also talks about women. How do you want to live? Do you want to live? Because there are people nowadays that don't. There is no will to live. You see this now with respect to climate change and the idea of holding off children. And he notices the differences between male and female minds. Like the stories are lived. Men and women ingest stories differently. And that's sort of important when we outline what do we want to believe in. Because if you've noticed when it comes to women if you're married in here, you'll notice that a lot of women will either take on your beliefs and they will go like further radically down the line to the right than you are, to a point that you don't know if you could live up to those standards, because women live stories. Women believe these things. And it was just a very good time that basic answers require basic beliefs. And it was a very good speech. And he choked up at the end about what he believes in. And it was the most powerful and heart-wrenching speech. I mean, it got a standing ovation. Like, he was the only one who got a standing ovation. And I'll tell you what, he deserved it. It was that good. And I look forward to reading that speech again because, yeah, I mean, it was quite an enjoyable moment. But I'll get to the OGC towards the end here, and I want to break down the other speeches that were discussed because there were quite a few good ones. So the next one that came up, which was Sunday morning, was that of Not Me, Not You. He spoke at last year's event, and if you were there last year, you'll know that he spoke on the nature of being brave and what to endure and what is to come. Not Me, Not You was there, both of the Stop the Steal rallies in D.C. back in like December and November of 2020. And, he raised the important question to the panel as well as to the audience last year, saying, look, if the FBI walked through these doors and arrested you, do you have the tenacity, the courage, and the conviction to hold on to your beliefs, even as you are treated as a political prisoner? And as a guy who has definitely taken a punch or two in the face, Not Me, Not You did a fantastic job sort of talking about that last year. And he sort of continued on this practicality, mechanical, but also kind of metapolitical speech where he was discussing ideological purity is actually going to kill you in the long run. Because, if you've ever been in like right-wing Twitter or even on YouTube and seen this sort of ecosystem on the internet, not everyone agrees on everything. And I mean, one only has to look at the room and recognize that there were like atheists, neo-pagans, Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, and everything in between that were like, yeah, we're not always going to agree on everything. We have different methods of political ideology, theology, practicality where we live. Those things are kind of important. And so he had said that, when we build ourselves a common foundation, and he was relating it back to where he lives, that you have the problem where if the foundation's not set right, it's more expensive to lift up the home and to reset the foundation than it is to just do it right the first time. And it was a really good talk on the practicality about this, because then he broke down sort of like the Reds versus the Whites and the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War, that despite the fact that the Whites could win victories, they couldn't ever organize or agree on what the world would look like in this post-Tsar, post-imperial Russia, where, priests are being murdered and the people are being terrorized for being kulaks, and we can't even agree on what we're going to do, and we can't coordinate, and that's a problem. And so there was no common foundation. And so, again, you famously saw so many whites become expats. Hi, Nick. Good to see you. But yeah, I also met Nicholas here I picked him up from the airport. It was nice to meet him. And it was very nice to do church with him on Sunday morning at a Typico service. But he outlined some basic values that I think isn't giving away the whole speech. I highly recommend that you buy the event book. I'm going to keep saying that again. But one of the big takeaways that he had said was children are sacred and our enemies know that they're sacred. They know that children are important, that children are our future. And that's why our enemies are so adamant about corrupting them and about going after them. Why attacking the family is so paramount for the left. And this is why really I'm a millstone futurist. I'm a millstone accelerationist, if you will. But he also said that we live in an objective reality. We do have a metaphysical world that we live in. That there are differences between groups and people that we may not be able to deal with. I may not be able to deal with the very best with the boomers. I may not be the best advocate for speaking to the Catholic land movement, for example. But we can agree on where we're at. And that, I wrote this in the margins because it kind of picked it up very clearly. We are molested by modernity. I know that Nicholas Soldo's got the great, fisted by Foucault handle on his Substack. But I mean, for the rest of us, we are all molested by modernity. And it is definitely something to keep in mind. So, the question becomes the argument for what we believe in, the argument for order, law, justice, recognition for homogeneity in ideas, that agreement matters way more than what we disagree on. The idea that, immigration is a civilizational issue, everyone should be able to agree on, despite where we may disagree. It's the same issue with, for instance, like Frody and I are going to agree on the fact that, like, there's reality problems, like very real problems on the ground in America and Europe with respect to immigration from countries that are not European, that is fundamentally destroying those countries internally. This goes all the way back to, like, Plato's Republic. And despite the fact that he can't stand Christianity, and I'm not a pagan, that we can at least agree that, hey, that's an important civilizational ending issue that needs to happen. And he had argued that the agreement weighs more than the disagreement. In our praxeology on how we address this, by basket weaving, sort of a confederal model, those things matter. We cannot wait for Superman. There is not going to be the Overmensch coming anytime soon. Zarathustra is not coming down from the mountain. And we don't know when the second coming is going to happen. And so we do have to start putting the work in ourselves. That line that lefties like to use, you got to do the work. You just got to put in the work. The right kind of does need to adopt that because we don't do a lot of labor in that respect. And he was really adamant about that. And he had said, the personal issues, make sure that your issues about, what happens after we win. Yes, Donald Trump gaming. That's the thing I address in my speech. And we will get into that shortly because I do actually address that talk. But yes, and also hello to Trevor from Canada up there in the Entropy chat. There is the Entropy link that's pinned in the description, as well as the pinned comment if you wish to ask any questions. But yeah, I mean, that was probably the big takeaway line. It was just like, children are sacred. Our enemies also know that they're sacred. And it hit very hard. But yeah, I mean, it was a very clear cut. These are real issues that we have to address. And that ideological purity will wreck any foundation that we do build on. And then I got to meet Mr. Grant Brooks, who's a part of the Old Glory Club. And you might have seen him on Twitter, and you've seen him write a few Substack pieces. And oh man, did he give the, what I like to call the Christopher Sandbach special. So he talked about everything ranging from like Marvin Minsky, K-Lines, and Nick Land's The Canon Wars that was recently published in Compact Mag earlier this summer, or earlier in spring. And he was talking about the fact that we have to be ready reading to our children. And he and I agreed on this, and he talked about it in his speech, that nothing gets me more angry, nothing gets me more worked up than when I go to a grocery store, I go to a supermarket, and all of a sudden there are just children in the cart with a tablet or a smartphone. It just makes me want to just chimp out and be really upset that these parents are being so neglectful. And it's just a lot of a really big issue. Because what you pass on to your children, what you grow up on as kids, matters a lot. How many people in chat, just press 1 if you've read it, press 2 if you haven't, press 1 if you read the book Hatchet as a kid. Hatchet by Gary Paulson. If you've read Hatchet, press 1 in the chat, press 2 if you haven't. Because those are the books I grew up on as a kid. I grew up in like Boy Scouting. I grew up reading Hatchet. I grew up reading and watching stories about war and the Civil War. Oh man, so many of you kids did not read Hatchet. Ooh. Well, go read it. It's a kid's book, but go read it. Some 1s, some 2s. These stories about survival, it's the same thing about like, the Swiss Family Robinson or Robinson Crusoe. Stories of survival and so on and so forth. Those are important books for us to read. And so he had argued that our long-term exposure to cultural artifacts, they facilitate our culture. There is it is an American book, John Morton. I know my audience is rather international, but it's the same thing with Where the Red Fern Grows. That deserves a warning because it will get to you. But he had said, he sort of takes the Tolkien approach and sort of the Silmarillion that, and as well as what Tolkien also said about culture, where language can exist, but a language is also rooted in culture. They're not separate from one another. So that's why when Tolkien creates this like new language for the elves and everything that we see in the Middle Kingdom and the Middle Earth, he's got to create all these cultures. He's got to create all this idea. And it sort of facilitates our understanding of the world that's based on our literary canon. And so he brings in Nick Land's of the Canon Wars. What is part of the English canon? What is a part of the Anglo-American canon? This was a very American talk. Yeah, read the Swiss Family Robinson, a lot of Louis L'Amour. Oh man, I've read more of those because my dad was big into Louis L'Amour. It's like all he ever read, or all he ever really reads. He's not a reader; he's a doer. And so he talks about Marvin Minsky, the K lines, the knowledge lines, that all these fragments turn into structures, highways, and the sort of network in our brains and a shared culture of what constitutes our shared collective understanding of what it means to be a member of the English-speaking world. The book is by Gary Paulson. Oh, and I'm just going to put the book name in here. It's definitely a book for your kids. It's a survival story, and it's meant for children. But like the canon is constantly always being rearranged. It creates complexity. We have roots, and he had sort of built off of the concept of what constitutes like sort of the American English canon. And well, when the country started, you would argue, and this is the point that Paul Fahrenheit made and other Americans made with AA, that it really is the King James Bible, Milton's Paradise Lost, and Shakespeare. And since then, it's been adapted and adopted to where you have things like the Scarlet Letter. You have these concepts of Washington Irving and others like Nathaniel Hawthorne building off of it, Herman Melville and Moby Dick. And we have this great literary tradition that also comes with a lot of politics involved. And he was sort of discussing that these things are fully formed as a mythos to the people. And when there are those that are not susceptible to that mythos because they don't share that culture, they don't share that background, the canon changes to sort of adapt these people. And yeah, I agree that there is a lot of frontier culture that comes to it. So the canon is incomplete. However, things must accept the fact that there is a lot that goes on here to the canon. There's ever things that change all the time. Canon to us is the thought and language and expression of a people in linguistic and literary terms. Again, we're building very much off Nick Land's article. And it was probably the most thought-provoking discussion because it was like, well, what is part of this American canon? What is part of, and again, Master and Commander is a really good example, right? All these other books about, the Arthurian legends, the discussions about these people that constitute things. And it was very funny because they also talked about like the Smithsonian doing their whole, what is white people, what is white culture? And it was talking about, being on time, Protestant work ethic, et cetera, et cetera. Like all those things are rooted in this literary tradition, this literary canon. And what does that mean for us going forward? What are we going to preserve to our children? What are you going to read to your children? Because what you read to them is what they're going to think of. And for someone like me who grew up on Westerns and science fiction like Ender's Game or the Orphanage series or Louis L'Amour books, nothing made me think about having like a grand Western in space as a kid, and this unbridled techno-optimism of a few of the right stuff and a few good men who could go into the stars and settle new worlds. It was that frontier culture about that. Yeah, and another part of white culture is changing your fire alarm batteries. That joke was made. Do not worry. We did not miss the wonderful bit there. Bennett's Book of Virtues was actually mentioned in one of the Q&A sessions, although Grant Brooks hadn't read it, but it was mentioned. So was Pilgrim's Progress, actually. So yeah, The literary canon is both reflects a time and place and changes in a reflexive too. That's absolutely true. That was a really big crux of his speech, and it was just a good discussion. But yeah, it was the Christopher Sandbatch of speeches. Mr. Sandbatch was not there at the event. I did not have the pleasure of meeting him, but his presence was most certainly felt at this event as well. It was just a very entertaining time. You have to transcend what you read and how you express that in your language. So yeah, I mean, if you really want to, I mean, I would read Marvin Minsky in this respect. You know, it's a good thing to consider. And then the next couple of speeches were from Mike of Pole, George Bagby, and Charlemagne. These three I did not take a lot of notes for because I sort of sat back and I just sort of ingested and listened to it all. George Bagby's speech was about foundations in history. If you haven't heard of George Bagby, or if you haven't seen him from Jay Burden streams or Academic Agent streams on the American Question, he's also got his own little channel, and he is probably one of the last Southern conservatives in the world right now, as I mentioned earlier. And he sort of told us the tale of how he got fired from the school that he worked at in Louisiana. He was a classical Christian educator. He was offering a classical education and sort of talked about the mental liberal blocks that both modern post-Enlightenment conservatives have, especially post-World War II conservatives have, and holding up to his actual beliefs, doctrines, and history got him let go. That's why we've raised money for him, both from the OGC as well as Jay Burden's Streamathon that we've done. And he sort of told this, yes, he does have a channel, just literally George Bagby. And I will share a video of his on the community tab after the stream so you can find him, because he's got great narrations, and he also responds to your comments. He'll do these little video responses. He'll just give you a long voice message and sort of talk about it. It's just his name. It's a great channel. Highly recommend it. But he was adamant, saying, like, listen, insulting my ancestors, not wanting to preserve my country, all of these things are anti-Christian, they're anti-American, they're anti-Western. And they hate, the current liberal tradition we have, hates this country, not a fan of it, and we have to get rid of it. We have to preserve our history, we have to preserve our traditions. It was the most eloquent way of giving an identitarian talk without being like a full-on identitarian. It was a very good time in that respect. So I didn't take a lot of notes at it. It's one of the speeches that you just want to listen to, because he was talking about honor, he was talking about culture, and I mean, he wasn't just referencing Christianity either. He was referencing the heroes of antiquity. He talked about, Homer, he talked about the Odyssey, he talked about the Aeneid, he talked about this need to appeal to honor and calling out Agamemnon and others within those great tales of the Odyssey and the Iliad. And it was just, it pulled from his entire classical educational roots. And it was an incredibly well done talk. And I didn't take too many notes for it because I just sat back and I listened, and it was red meat to me. But oh yeah, he was the one. I thought it was Dave. I think Dave and George Bagby received standing ovations. And he did, yes. But yeah, both Bagby and I think Dave got standing ovations. But it was just well done. That's the speech I look forward to the most reading again in the event book. Oh boy, I can't wait. I'm really excited. And Mike of Pole came on, and some of you probably know him primarily because of his music stuff that he does on Twitter. I kind of feel bad because I got to meet him in person. His talk was really good. I stepped out for the Q&A just because I needed a glass of water and I needed to use the restroom. Sitting down there for hours is a lot, but he was like, we're going to talk about Deleuze and Guattari, and we're going to talk about hauntology. And oh, by the way, we got to find a way to take these things that scare the left and use it against them. And he's like, my influences are the French post-structuralists and Cody Wilson, the guy that 3D prints firearms. And you're like, all right, you have my attention, sir, because this sounds very much like sort of the things that have influenced me. But maybe that's me just doing the sunk cost fallacy of reading too many French post-structuralists. But his was also a much more mechanical talk. How can we use these leftist concepts and how can the right weaponize them through their own praxis? It's a very mechanical speech, and he does a really good job explaining where he's coming from when citing these French thinkers. So again, one of those speeches that you really want the event book for. But I know him mainly because of the music stuff. He did those like diss tracks on Twitter. And I hate it when people do like the mass like tagging of accounts. I'm like, oh, get this out of here. I accidentally blocked him very early on. But again, pleasure to meet him. It was a really good time and a very good talk nonetheless. And then, of course, the speeches closed out with Charlemagne. Charlemagne last year gave an honest assessment of sort of the state of the DR. There's probably like only 1 million or less people that sort of believe in this stuff in the United States. And so that's your vanguard. That's what you have to work with. We're all sort of poaching from the same crowd. And so Charlemagne's speech was about what regime change looks like and the need to address some of the things that Yarvin and Patrick Deneen don't talk about. And one of the things that, for instance, Curtis Yarvin never talks about, and neither does Patrick Deneen talk about when it comes to regime change, is... Oh, I unblocked him, Cindy. Sorry, I'm responding to chat. But one of the things that Charlemagne had said very clearly, and that's really the biggest note I took from his speech, was the military always gets a veto, whether it's, in Italy, whether it's in Spain, whether it's with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and no one talks about that. So that's something that I think people need to keep in mind, is the state of the military. So regime change is going to be a little difficult. Peaceful regime change is going to be difficult because the military gets a veto, and that you need to actually still have beliefs for an alternative system or to stop believing in things. And in America, people still believe in stuff. But he was more adamant that in America, if you're going to have like a Franco-like character in the study of the Spanish Civil War, he kind of echoed the same opinion that Mr. Abatoy had echoed from American Reformer, that like you're going to get a Protestant Franco. Like in America, still the cultural ethos of this country is still like some kind of Protestantism. And so for all of the like based tradcaths or ortho bros like out there, like, listen, this is the United States. You're going to have to appeal to that kind of masses to get them on your side in that respect. They'll veto us hard. And he made that point very clear, that any methodology that you want to talk about regime change has to address the fact that the military has undergone a purge. It's woke. And the moment you take on like the leaf, to either be a major, lieutenant colonel, or get the full bird after captain in the United States, after 03, you're an officer, like you're a politician in a uniform. That's all you really are. And he talked about that, the need to address the fact that like really where we're going here is Christianity, at least in the United States. It may not be as prominent in Europe, but it is going to have a lasting impact here in the United States. And that's what we're going to have to get behind in respects to sort of creating a political formula. But he does a really good job breaking down, Gil Robles in the Spanish Civil War. He sort of talks about other civil conflicts like the Finnish Civil War. And it was a very good talk. So, great speeches all around. So I guess I'll reference my stuff, and then I want to sort of just talk about the big picture. The speech that I gave was on the issue of cataphatic politics. So like affirmative politics. Because for so long on the right, both in the United States and in Europe, we sort of define ourselves by what we are not. We operate our politics via negativa, or for those who are kind of familiar with Eastern theology, it is apophatic politics. And so my conversation was about the fact that we have a lot of different groups of people. What are our baseline affirmations that we can agree on without it being like lowest common denominator? Because for instance, like if you look at the Old Glory Club, you have a pretty healthy mix of one Eastern Orthodox, one neo-pagan, 6 or 7 Prots, and I think 6 or 7, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, that are Roman Catholic. So like, despite all of our like theological issues, despite all of our differences in geography, where we grew up, some of us are Southerners, some of us are Yankees, some of us are Blue Staters, some of us are West Coast Bay Area, like reactionaries. So we can all agree on these principles of what the OGC is for. We've all signed on to the dotted line saying we affirm these ideas, we affirm these kind of cultural attitudes, we affirm these kinds of codes of conduct, despite our differences in religion and despite our differences in politics and geography. And so I'm not going to go into the speech entirely, but I will break down the 5 issues that I think the right can affirm. Posterity is number 1. To leave something behind for our descendants, for our posterity. And also this means, is for those of us who have Christian beliefs, this also means that leave behind things and to put good work into the earth for the life after this one. The second one is realism. What is like real for us to achieve victory? So, for instance, if we ever want to talk about putting the woke away, it's got to be about demolishing the Civil Rights Act. That's really important. The third one is discrimination. I know that sounds like spicy and base, but what I mean really is by like the Nick Land concept of discrimination. All societies discriminate. We discriminate against food with mold. Like we discern against it. We know that that's bad for us. We discriminate against seed oils, right? Like those sort of things. Those things are really important. So like we gatekeep against bad actors. We go against the concepts of like unfettered immigration, and then we recognize baseline realities. So again, discrimination. The fourth one is work or labor. We recognize that you can't just go to a church or you join a club and then all of a sudden you have community. Like, no, you actually have to put in work. You have to put in your labor. You have to put in your time. You have to put in the work to actually make sure that you have a community. This is why basket weaving is so important. This is why when people tell you to go to church, they don't just mean go to church because there's going to be people there that you agree with. No, we go to church because you, one, commune with God. And then secondly, like you have to put together a community of the faithful. I put more work in my time, in my day, not besides my day job and stuff like that, doing the work at my church. Whether that's taking care of people with cancer, singing in the choir, or, doing, beautifying volunteer work in my community. Like you actually have to put the work in. And not just in a religious context of works, but also in the context of like, if you want to build something, a business, a network, or anything like that, you actually have to put the effort in. And I mean, New Founding is a really good example of this. I mean, Nate Fisher put $5 million of his own capital into this project to ensure that people like you don't work for shitlibs, that your employers aren't going to fire you because you believe that men are men and women are women. Simple as, right? Don't hate them, just don't like them. Simple as. And then the last one was honor. And I thought that this was really important, was to be recognizing of limitations, good faith, and knowing when not to step off the deep end or to jump the shark or to nuke the fridge. Online, it becomes really easy for us to argue with one another and to crap on one another over petty disagreements. But once you meet someone IRL, man, that shit disappears instantly. Like it's gone. And I mean, to speak also to New Founding's bit here, both Oren and I know Nate personally. We've met him and we know the guys over at New Founding. So we literally were texting Nate and Santiago from New Founding while George Bagby was giving a speech like, bro, you guys need to get this guy a job. Like, if we can't get George Bagby hired, who did nothing on optical or crazy, we're failing our jobs here. But honor is really important in recognizing that we have to approach each other with good faith, and also to recognize that when someone's acting in bad faith, that we have to rebuke them, and that we have to treat this is with actual seriousness. Like, I get it. It's fun to meme and do all sorts of stupid stuff on the internet. Lord knows I'm just as impulsive and bad about it. I know. I get it. I really do. But at the same time, I'm going to be very quick to not, just shit on somebody's take because I disagree with it. I want to interrogate it and I want to have a discussion, especially because I don't want to punch right. You see that so many times in the political sphere. We just saw this happen now with sort of the Trump and DeSantis morons going after Pedro Gonzalez. And I mean, I defended that guy, but then he goes out of his way to like just shit on Trump supporters and just, stir the pot more. And it's like, that's not honor. That's not honorable. That is not in good faith discussion needs to be done. Like if you're supposed to be like this face and editor of Chronicles magazine, you're acting like a total dimwit. No honor there. No honor there. And we also talked about like the exit group and also what the OGC is doing. Like you have to put the labor into doing it. So those were sort of the 5 things I addressed: posterity, realism, discrimination, work, and honor. And again, very easy to walk around the stage, talk to people. It's very fun to speak extemporaneously. I like doing it. I did it in college and high school, so it was rather easy for me to speak. And then, of course, you had the Old Glory Club offer what they're doing. And, of course, if you're not familiar with them, the Old Glory Club is an organization that I was a founding member of, still am a part of, that is meant to be both a fraternal organization in the sense that we can start chapters. Members of chapters aren't going to get sued because they have to like go to the org first, and half our team is like either in law school or are lawyers. But it's oriented around the old 19th and 20th century idea of mutual aid. We want people to have networks that say, hey, you're looking for a job. If you can't find one through New Founding, our guys at the OGC can, or we can hire you directly. Secondly, we want people to be appreciative of American culture. There's a lot of flagrant anti-Americanism on the right, and for reasons I can definitely relate to and understand. But there's also that frontiersman culture, that settler culture that built this country. And it's for those with that kind of heritage. And we want people to come on board as Americans to sort of sign up with that. And so both a patronage network, but also a network that can ensure if, for instance, George Bagby got fired, like he did, we can raise money for him. And the money that we did raise for him was enough for him to buy a new van that he now drives for Lyft and Uber full time in Louisiana, of all places. God bless him. That allows him to do that. So it's focusing on the fact that we actually have to build, we have to network, and we're actually putting the effort in to where it does not matter where you live in the country. These networks can facilitate hiking, emergency preparedness situations. Like if you live in like Kansas or whatever, and you want to start a chapter, and what the OGC chapter there does is like respond to tornadoes, clearing roads, and, helping take care of people who've lost power. That's what we want to do. These things do not have to be explicitly political. We've learned from the last 7 years of online politics that this is not going to just be going out with tiki torches or being, entrapped by the feds saying, do this. We want people to engage in things that are being able to break bread with your neighbor and to take care of our country and to take care of our countrymen. And Matt King Cole, I'm going to put the link in the chat here real quick so you can see it. Because, this stuff is like really important with respects to where America's going. And so here is the channel, and we'll put that. Yeah, I'm a paralegal in Iowa, and I might go to law school. Well, hey, we need all the more people we can get. So it's in the chat there right now. But, those are the discussions we had. So, like the president, the vice president, the secretary, our legal guys were there. Everyone from the club was basically there except Pete Quinones, who had a scheduling conflict, and he's on board. And so all these things that are discussing, ranging from lawfare, emergency preparedness, to making sure that you're not alone. And that if your guy, gets flack for being, anti-woke or like conservative in a bar, he's got friends that he can hang out with. There's strength in numbers in that respect. And those are really important for us to consider. So, we've got plenty of stuff as to what the OGC is about. We've discussing about opening chapters, and there was already conversations about that. So please stay tuned, both on the channel, its Twitter page, and its Substack for more info. We'll be putting up a website shortly as well. So, an actual nonprofit institution that's not going to be dicked around with, and we're going to take it very seriously. And we are being very strict about gatekeeping, vetting, and things like that. So there's not going to be any sort of, any humdinger from Antifa can just join. That's the big deal that we're talking about. It's the same thing that New Founding does. Like they vet very stringently, and that's something that we're going to be learning the lessons. And we've had people who've been a part of other organizations that are helping us out to learn from the past mistakes. So it's not going to be as risky or dangerous as like 2016 era politics and organization. We've learned those lessons. Everyone can see them, and that's our plan. So yeah, those are the big deal, both for patronage, support, jobs, networking, etc. But I'm going to close it out there. I'll take super chats if there's been any sent. But I think the big deal with this event was that people were comfortable, and people already know that the hour is late, Moloch is in the gates, and that it is a very powerful entity that has been unleashed both by liberalism, the Enlightenment, and modernity, and that we have a lot of work ahead of us to do. And, a lot of people say when we say, do things in the real world, do things in the real world, what that usually means is that people have conferences and they just talk. But most of the speeches that were here and most of the work that has already been done from June of this year, June and July of this year, now to, there's a Discord server that you use to sort of get yourself taking like a political compass test, and then you go on Matrix. And Matrix is the place to do it as well, because that's more secure. But, you have to build, and people were ready to work, ready to build. So many people were there handing out business cards and handing out, this is what I work on. This is what I do. Let me know how I can help you. Let me know how you can help me. people were ready to network, and people were there not just to socialize or listen to the talks from like e-labs and influencers. They were ready to meet like-minded people to do business with, and to recognize that a lot of people there work in publications, work in law firms, have their own independent businesses, and they're not just 20s and 30-something. There's a lot of 40 and 50-year-old guys there that were like, I wish I knew about these people sooner, because there's more energy, more intellectual capacity, and more realism on the right with that respect. And so I'll put the Discord stuff for basket weaving in the comments afterwards, because I don't have it like readily on my person. But yeah, I mean, that's something to continually be in mind, that there was work already happening and work ready to do. And that was really the big takeaway from this event. Was it nice to see everybody? Was it nice to shake Dave's hand? Was it nice to meet Oren in person again? Absolutely. But everyone was there for the explicit purpose of addressing the theme of the event and addressing the core issue, which was, how are we going to build? What are we already building? And what can we build off what already exists? You've got New Founding. You've got American Reformer for like evangelical Christians. You've got the Exit Group. You've got the Beowulf Foundation. You've got Scyldings. You've got the Oral Glory Club. People want to work because people know that in about 5-10 years' time, if not sooner, things are going to get progressively worse. Conversations about South African-style blackouts happening in California, in New York, and Texas is already happening and has happened already. The hour is nigh. The enemy is in the gates. And so this event, as much fun as it was to watch people drink and smoke and have a good time and be jolly, everyone knew why they were there. And it wasn't just to meet their friends, and it wasn't just to meet e-celebs or anything like that. They were there because they recognized the fundamental problem of modernity is already here. The hour has already come and passed. Just like when Garrett wrote that the revolution came in the night of depression, the revolution already came in the night of recession, and the night of progressivism, and in the night of the post-World War II legal aftermath that we inherit, especially with the Civil Rights Act and more. So yeah, this event was really important with that respect. So with that, I'll take some questions, but and some super chats if there were any. I'll check Discord or Entropy in a minute here. But yeah, that was the event. And that was discussing where we were at. We don't have to discuss, those issues. There was, yes, of course there was. People drank and had cigars and had a great time. I mean, not everyone is a teetotaler, but, the wealth, we talked about elite patronage and getting their people's attention. And there was a lot of people there that were influential and had businesses that were successful. And that stuff was important because you want to work with those people rather than the next 20-something with barely a disposable income. So yeah, it was a big focus on building. So yeah, I mean, those are the issues that I think are going to be really important. That's really the big issues to take away from this event. So in about 3 hours or so, Dave the Distributist will be going down with a slideshow to break down his takes on the event. He broke them down into various, various categories. But Mike of Pole says, I wish I made it clear in my speech that our common foundation is putting one foot in front of the other. We have no choice. Yeah, I agree. Like, you actually have to work on that respect. And I really think that that's the big deal here that we have to win. Is that you do have to work. And you do have to put your foot in front of the door and one in front of the other and do the good job. But yeah, everyone should be a teetotaler. However, I disagree. Sorry. Wine maketh glad the heart of man. No thanks. No thanks in that respect. But with that, I will be sure to put a comment section down below for you to buy the event book, to link yourself to the basket weaving server, how to get started with that, and of course the Old Glory Club and what we are up to. So I will hopefully see you all in the chat over in Dave the Distributist stream, who will be going on just a few hours later this evening. And I hope that you all have a... Oh, never mind. 1 second. Does the OGC have any rejection criteria for local chapters in the spirit of gatekeeping? Yes, actually, Duke and Ashley. So that would be with respects to if you want to bring someone on board, you actually have to have the vetting of more than one character. We also interview the people that are going to be involved. The emails that we've already received. We've already started asking questions about vetting, what they do, what are about them. And one of the things that we talked about at the event is that those are also going to require codes of conduct that has to be signed on for. And the moment that someone does anything stupid, like, oh, we're the Austrian painter chapter or whatever, like immediately disassociated, publicly banned, publicly disavowed. And those people are like forever blacklisted. And in fact, we're going to be having a stream on this issue about chapters in the coming weeks after the whole Gettysburg events that we're covering right now on the channel. So I believe it's next week that we'll be covering this more fully in detail, but it will be discussing what that looks like. We have a code of conduct that is being discussed, a vetting criteria. Also Pat Casey is talking to us about how to avoid the faults and issues of other organizations. So we've got a lot going for us in that respect. But yeah, there is going to be rejection criteria for local chapters. And also you need 5 members of a chapter, which means you need to have 5 guys that can trust each other and recognize that you're going to be part of an organization that is focusing on networking, patronage, mutual aid, preparedness, and good citizenship and conduct. So yeah, there's going to be a lot going on there in the future. Do I drink now? No, I do not drink. I mean, I certainly do miss drinking. But for me, I'm certainly a big fan of the idea that I have a new kidney that I'd like to take care of. So no, I don't drink. I find it very fitting that the Eucharist is all that I have now in my life, and I'm very happy with that. But I used to drink quite excessively, and I used to smoke all the time. So I'm very happy that my life has ordered itself via its transplants, if that's the case. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in that respect coming forward, both in my own life and also networking and working with others in great discussion. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bid you all a farewell. It's been a pleasure to speak with you all. We're going to be covering all of the events of Gettysburg, both the legal side, the historical stuff of the Civil War, all sorts of great times we'll be having there. I think a few people are also doing a meetup there as well at the battlefield. I know it's not very far from Paul Fahrenheit's location, so he's going to have a great time giving tours and a great talk and a great discussion, and to see some of the, some of the reenactors there. But yeah, I hope that you all take care. I will be live later this week. I won't no prudent observations this week. Unfortunately, I will be at a funeral. Please pray for the soul of Bridget, who is recently reposed. We'll be serving at her funeral. But other than that, I hope that all of you take care. I'll have some Substacks out later this week. Hopefully a video, we'll see. But until then, I'll see you in Dave's stream, and I hope that you all get to attend the event next year. Take care, and God bless.